Hello everyone, and welcome back to our lesson. So, in the past couple of weeks, we have transformed our program from a function-based program all the way into a class-based program. Now, given it is not complete, and this is our first recorded session, so if you're here from the last live stream, you have not missed anything at all. So we're just going to go ahead and basically continue our process of converting these methods. One of the trickier parts of this is learning exactly where and when to change variables and functions, where to place the variables and functions, and how to call them properly. So one of the changes I went ahead and made is inside our draw function right here, we actually added a new parameter called ball. And the reason why I do this is because ball is no longer just some variable, floating around. Our ball position and ball velocity is no longer something that's accessed within the entire program. Instead, it has been turned into a class. But we can't just go ahead and call the class. We do have to actually go ahead and call our own object, which is why when we look at our three objects we have created here, our two paddles and our one ball, we will notice that these three are actually all entered in as parameters. Now, this might be a little confusing at first, as many of you guys probably have not seen actual objects being used anywhere, and especially as parameters of a function. It is something that you will have to get used to, but essentially these objects are just normal variables with special methods that you wrote. That's pretty much all. When you have your regular variables, say your own string, there are functions that can be called for these specific strings. For example, one of the common ones that you might use later on is .upper, which quite literally just changes the string to all uppercase characters. Now, the reason why only a string type can use this method is because the string is also acting almost like an object itself. In fact, it is a different type of variable than your regular integer, meaning that it can call these different types of functions. But that's a little more theoretical, so we won't get too deep into that. But for now, we're just going to stick with the fact that objects are variables, and we can use them in function parameters. So now that we've established that, we want to know how exactly can we use these objects. So these objects have already been passed from our function parameter into our function. So our new variables are paddle1, paddle2, and ball. Very easy, right? However, it's not quite so easy yet. These functions here are all underlined in red, and that is because they are not defined. It's that simple. Well, how do we make this red disappear? Well, there is no simple trick that PyCharm can help you with. Rather, it's really understanding what happened to these functions. There's a reason why these functions in this program, in our draw function, are not underlined in red, and that's because they are defined as regular functions. However, our draw paddle function has now been moved into our paddle class, meaning that we can no longer just go ahead and simply draw a paddle like this. Instead, what we need to go ahead and do is we need to write paddle1 dot draw paddle, and suddenly our red underline disappears, right? Same thing here. For our second draw paddle, we need to do paddle2 dot draw paddle. And what this is doing is essentially is recognizing that, it's no longer just calling a function from some random place in this program. Instead, it's looking at this object of paddle2. It's recognizing the fact that it is a paddle object, going back into our paddle class right here, and then looking through all of our functions. And it sees we do have our draw paddle function right here. So that is a simple breakdown of how we can go ahead and call these methods inside of our objects. Now the next thing is, how do we access these parameters? suddenly we don't know how we can go ahead and pass these certain parameters in, as it seems quite impossible since we don't actually have access to these variables. Well, there's a couple things that we do need to touch on. One of them being the fact that our paddle 1 and paddle 2 drawing our paddles, we got to go back to our draw paddle function. So we move up into our draw paddle function, and we'll notice that the only thing that's actually passed inside this function is going to be canvas, because everything else is already defined here. There's nothing else that needs to be changed because it's already been defined when we went ahead and created the paddle. So instead, we can just go ahead and delete this, right? Both of these are standardized, so all we need to do is pass through the canvas so we can actually draw it on the canvas. Now, it's a little trickier with when we go ahead and we move into our different functions, like our paddle movement, where paddle velocity is defined both inside our class and as a parameter. So we will get to that momentarily. But for now, we need to do the exact same thing with our ball position and ball movement functions. Ball position, we'll look here and we'll see, alright, we want to go into our ball class and we can see, is ball position defined? Yes, it is. And when we go ahead and we draw our ball here, we see that the only thing we actually need is going to be our canvas. So same thing again. When we go ahead and we call this, what we're going to do, actually this entire thing needs to be changed into draw ball, but we can go ahead and do this one first. So ball1 dot ball movement, and I believe we do need our canvas in here. Second thing is, we'll notice that this is calling a draw function for a circle, indicating that we're trying to draw the ball here. However, acknowledging the fact that we do need to draw the ball, like we needed to draw the paddles, we went ahead and we created our draw ball function. So we no longer need to have this piece of code here, and instead we can just write ball1 dot draw ball, and we only need our canvas parameter. So we see this code, and it's still 4 lines long. Nothing's changed really, except for the fact that these 4 lines have all been halved, because we no longer need to pass in all of these parameters every single time we go ahead and we call these functions, and indicating that this draw function is inside this while true loop. It's called quite often, and when you need to call these functions extremely often, it's often very helpful to go ahead and simplify things. So when you go ahead, you test your loops, everything is much easier to follow, and there's not many things to get convoluted to or confuse you. So now that we've kind of fixed all our red underlines, essentially the syntax errors, and the way we can tell this is if we go over here, we can see that there are a list of warnings here, and some of them are urgent warnings. Like if we go ahead and say type some random characters here, actually that's defining a variable, so that wouldn't have affected it. So if we are to say come over here and change this variable into this, we should see a red underline, but I guess it just cancels it. I guess that's the advantage of using PyCharm. It will automatically do some of these things for you. Yeah, so when we have an error in our code, PyCharm will notify you that your code will not run. And it's important to check all of these before you even test run your program, because otherwise it will just give you that plain error. So second thing that we are going to need to accomplish is make sure that our logic actually flows here, right? So this draw function is a lot more than just drawing. It calls a lot of functions. It uses all 3 objects, so it's a very, very busy function essentially. So just occurred to me that the name of our ball object is actually not ball1 but just ball, because we named this parameter ball. So That's another thing to not get confused over. When we go ahead and we create these parameters, these are the new names of the variables. It doesn't matter what the names of the variables are when you put them into our draw function here. They will change as soon as we put them into our function, just like any other normal variable. So hopefully that does not confuse you. So now that we've gone ahead and done this, so we want to just go ahead, give ourselves a quick run through, see if we have any errors. And we can see that obviously there still are errors, but we want to go ahead and look at this piece of code. So line 145, and it says in draw name paddle 1 velocity is not defined. And that would be correct. So essentially, when we go ahead and we check our paddle movement function here, we want to come here. We see that we do in fact need our paddle velocity. Now, where do we get this paddle velocity? So paddle velocity is going to be controlled by our key up and key down. Key up and key down right here. So these two functions are essentially reading whatever you input into the keyboard and saying, okay, this guy's pressing, say, W. So our left paddle needs to go up. That's what this is doing, and it's also at the same time setting the velocities. So how do we make sure that it knows, oh, this is how we're going to go ahead and track the velocities? Well, we got to uncomment these. And as soon as we do that, I believe the error should go away and it moves on to another error because that's no longer the main error, right? So we come back here and we go back to our draw function and we see, all right, we finally fixed this problem. But do we really understand what is going on? Well, we have to take a look at this. So when we go into this paddle movement function, it seems almost the same as our paddle movement function in our original program right here, except for the addition of a bunch of self dot whatever the name of the variable is. But there's another slight difference. We'll notice that on these variables, we will call self dot paddle position, whereas on this variable, we will only call paddle velocity. And the reason for this is because our paddle position is an inherent part of our object, of our paddle right here. And we want to pass through this identity of the object of this paddle through this object. So it will stay with it and it is part of our paddle. However, this paddle velocity is actively changed outside of our paddle class. Now, if we really wanted, we could go ahead and add in our key up and key down function into our paddle class. However, that would be adding another layer of class methods that we would need to rewrite, and it would provide a lot of unnecessary hassle. So in this case, with these simple key up and key down functions, in which we are likely not going to touch again, there is no real need to convert them into methods inside our paddle class. So I've said a lot so far, and I know it's a lot to take in. So I will give you guys about 30 seconds to kind of go back, make sure you guys really understand this. So the main points that we kind of went over are making sure we understand that objects are like variables, and that we can just go ahead and plug them in as parameters, and that we can just go ahead and treat them like regular variables, except with these special methods. And if you still don't understand what I mean by that, go ahead and write a little class and object program yourself and try to use the methods inside of your program and understand how you call these methods. It can be a little tricky to get at first, but once you go ahead and get it, it's smooth rolling and you will really understand what exactly I'm trying to accomplish here by writing in these objects as parameters for our new function for draw. So again, 30 seconds to just kind of really grasp everything I've said. And I will go down and show you our draw function. Alright, so now that you've had a little time to recuperate, so we're not going to go to the one inaccurate part of our program, which is here. All our objects, where we create them. You'll notice that there's something a little bit odd about these. Every parameter is 1. And the reason for this is because this is simply a temporary value. We put it there just to demonstrate the fact that we can in fact create this object. But now that we've demonstrated this fact, we now need to go ahead and put in actual accurate values. How do we do this? Well, we simply have to scroll up and understand what value we need to put in. So we need our width, height, paddle velocity, canvas, and color. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we can actually just copy this for now. And we can paste it right here and right here. So these are essentially just placeholders for the values that we are going to actually be putting in. So we want to go back into our program here, and we want to get our width and height. Our width being 600, and our height being 400. Actually, it might be 8 and 80. I believe that width and that height are going to be the heights of the canvas, so we do not need those values. 8 and 80. Next thing we need is our paddle velocity. So we simply need to think about this. Our paddle, when we create it, we obviously don't want it to be moving. So what are we going to do? We're just going to set it as 0. Next thing is our canvas. So at this stage in our program, we have not yet created a canvas. But if we think about it, within our paddle class over here, we never actually use a canvas. So we can simply go ahead and delete this, and we can see there are no errors here because our canvas is always passed down. Now, here comes another thing. What can you delete and what is exactly redundant? Well, our original plan for paddle velocity was to actually use it inside our paddle movement class. But at this point in time, it seems that our paddle velocity is actually determined as a global variable and not as a class variable, meaning that defining paddle velocity inside of our object here or class here is actually completely redundant, and we don't need it at all. The only instance of paddle velocity we use is right here and in these spots over here, but all of these are used as parameters, not as class variables. So once we come down here, we can actually just go ahead and delete our paddle velocity as well as our canvas. Finally, we want to go ahead and settle on the color. Well, our color for our paddles, at this point, we just want to go back, check our original program. Inside our draw paddle, color is passed in as a parameter, so we want to look back at where was draw paddle called. Well, in our draw function. And we see red and green. In this case, I guess we can just go with red and green. So red is going to be, actually, is red defined in this program? Oh, yes it is. So even better, we can just set this one as red and this one as green. So we've done this little process, and now we want to do the exact same thing with our ball object. So ball has ball position and ball velocity. Oops, deleted the parentheses. All right. Ball position and ball velocity. Are there any redundancies? We want to look through here, and we see, all right, inside ball movement, we use ball position and ball velocity. So it is not something that is redundant. However, what exactly is the value of it? Well, in this case, we will need to go back and check our original program. So we will notice here, all right, there's nothing defined in our global variables other than these two lists. So what we're going to go ahead and do is just put in these two lists very simply. But we want to make sure that these two lists kind of set an accurate tone, essentially meaning that we set something that is actually a correct value and not just the base value that we set over here. So we want to go ahead and Control F, ball position. And we look through it and we see, all right, it's defined as a global variable here. So we are making a couple steps here. So we want to make sure that we do this ourselves. And we check through here and then we realize, oh, we don't actually have those variables. They are all inside our class. So now that we've done that, we kind of look through the rest of the program and we see, oh, it's not actually going to be changed until our actual ball movement function over here. And in this case, it's all inside our method right over here. So we have contained it properly. So that will conclude this class. And in the next class, we will take the next step of finally putting together all our components and hopefully being able to create a working program. And we will also make sure we solve this issue of calling a paddle in the middle of our ball class. So with that note, I guess I will see you guys next week, and thank you for watching.